Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Hassan with another episode of my podcast, Cult Conversations, the Influence Continuum with Dr. Steve Hassan. And I have a colleague and friend, fellow researcher of QAnon with me, who's been on this previously with me, Dr. Stu Schulman, who was introduced to me while I was doing my doctoral work at Fielding because I wanted to know people who are experts at deep data and quantitative studies and such. And I got introduced to you, Stu, and I'm still grateful to this day for knowing you and learning from you. You are the founding editor of the Journal of Information Technology and Politics and hold a PhD in American politics, and currently the founder and CEO of TechSifter, a software business serving academic, commercial, and business clients. And Discover Text is a web-based text analytics platform for improving human and machine learning. So your past work, you are a scholar, includes extensive teaching as well as leadership roles, building externally funded teams for collaborative interdisciplinary research. Your projects include qualitative as well as quantitative surveys and social media data, as well as human annotation at scale, information retrieval, and machine learning methods. Whoa. And before we start, I want to just read the title of your most recent academic paper that you presented last year, I believe, called Tools, Methods, and Political Games in the Age of Musk. We may title the podcast that because it's very timely. And it was prepared for Decrypting Digital Authoritarianism, which was a conference hosted and funded by the European University Institute. And that meeting took place in October of 2024. And all I can say is you were able with your company to go back to the first posts about QAnon, and I've been watching your little videos that you were creating, explaining how you were able to forensically, in my mind, forensically evaluate who's who and who are bots and everything else. And since Musk took over Twitter, called it X, a lot of people that I know have left X. They feel like it's a toxic stew. Some people are on Blue Sky. I'm on Blue Sky, but I don't have near the following there. But I don't know. So I'm going to toss it to you, buddy. We're in such a crazy digital authoritarianism thing. So please, take it away and tell us what what your take is on things, please, and what we should be knowing about and protecting ourselves and stuff.
Thank you for that introduction. It's very generous, and also for having me on your show. I think it's also great to be reminded to go back and read the paper. You say it's the most recent one. It's also really the first one I've written since maybe 2009. So it was a journey back into the writing process itself and the research process and the culmination of work that had captured my attention from about 2019 through the election of 2024, and still to this day, about how Twitter, and I call it Twitter, and I'll always call it Twitter, how Twitter fits into this broader information political landscape that I agree many people are leaving. Not everyone. I think some people are staying and putting up a fight. What concerns me is researchers are leaving, either because of lack of access to the data or lack of free access to the data or over political concerns. I think it's a little bit like leaving the scene of an ongoing car crash because it's messy and you don't want to be involved, you don't like it. there's a car crash happening here day by day. Twitter is and has been intimately involved in every bit of it. And whether it's the most important or one of the most important platforms, the time since I finished writing that paper in October, I could go back and make quite a few changes and say that we may have underestimated the importance of Elon Musk
Mm,
quite significantly, not just in the role of the new Trump administration, which has caught, I think, everybody completely by surprise, but also in winning the election itself
mm,
and in performing the platform supportive technologies and the platform linking technologies and the networking capability and the data and the targeting and the young Turks who could write the code.
mm.
I think there are probably, when we know the full story someday, there will be specific states or several states where he could take a substantial amount of credit for the outcome in that state.
When you say state, you mean state actors like Russia, or are you talking about
No, I'm talking
American
about the
states?
American states. So
I see.
Pennsylvania, for example, is a place he seemed to be quite proud of, and had a smirky
That's where
attitude
the
about.
Moonies are. That's my former cult, is in Pennsylvania.
And so my general take is he has introduced elements into governance in the U.S. that uh, existed prior to him buying Twitter and deploying it as he does in the ways he does. These things were problems that predate Elon Musk. And the fact that academia in general seems to be pulling back in revulsion because it's too bad to look at. There's too much hate speech. There's too much fear mongering. I don't want to be in that space. Well, great. It's true. Most people who study that are traumatized by it
Yeah,
and need to get their own help as a result of spending too much time with the data. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't study it. And I think
right.
it's given everything, again, just the last 2 weeks, the last month, we really need to double down and say it's messy, it's unpleasant, it's overwhelming, it's a fire hose of problems and ethical pitfalls, but we need to study it because I think it's one of the key levers of power in the modern political system.
Yeah, and when you say the last 2 weeks, just because people will be watching this for, I think, years to come, we're talking about the last 2 weeks. So 2 weeks. So we're in the first month of the inauguration of Trump's effort to create a dictatorship. I will say it because he's only putting loyal people who will say and stand by his lie that he won the 2020 election, which he completely didn't, and that the January 6th attack and insurrection was just a friendly gathering and not a violent coup attempting to keep him in power, which it was. And those big lies need to be kept outed by people who, say facts matter, science matters. You don't create your own reality. But can I ask you to comment on alternate reality gaming, because it's a
Sure.
major piece of your paper, and when we met, you were explaining to me your research on and QAnon and Michael Flynn and digital soldiers. Can we go back a little bit before we come back to Musk and what's happening now?
Sure. I think that's a good idea. So the ARG idea, alternate reality game or live action role play, the main idea is that people using authentic or inauthentic or hybrid identities in public online spaces engage in activities that allow them to express themselves and build networks and followings using the features of the platform or the technology itself, the likes, the retweets, the fact that if you gather a following, you have some influence. I think you know something about that. So the people are drawn into that, and to some extent, some of the players on the internet have learned how to frame that activity or to look at that activity as amenable to gamification, meaning people will play for different reasons, but they're all getting the same kind of adrenaline hit or rush from playing the game or succeeding in the game, whether it's writing a creative piece of a story about, the emergence of QAnon, or whether it's creating a viral tweet. Any of these people who've gone on to internet success, glory, sometimes insurrection, jail, and a pardon, these people were engaged in an activity, an alternate reality game, where they were scripting narratives about history, sometimes by asking questions and posing ridiculous answers, by feeding the various threads are out there, building subcultures around those identity claims, and ultimately trying to produce a real world activity. So the real world activity, taking it from an online game where you create identity, create network, get power, get rewards, to the offline activities where people gather and bring assault weapons to a state capitol, or
Pizzagate.
gather and get Pizzagate, or gather and do things that are disruptive, or at the very least,
Hmm.
which create a subculture, several subcultures of people who are loyal more to the storytelling than they are to any sort of political accuracy, historical accuracy. It's really about the story itself, the game, and your role in it, your place. And because so many of the actors are made up people who have emoji for their image, or they made up names, they could come from anywhere. Some of them do come from anywhere.
Like
Some
Russia.
of them, really, Russia, Chinese pretending to be Russians, or all sorts of layers. I mean, India and Canada have a huge beef going, and
Mm-hmm.
so the things going on in the "Make Canada Great Again" movement are, I think, all a part of the adaptability and flexibility of the platform, the affordances, and
Mm-hmm.
again, that brings us to how this was something that Elon can't take credit for.
Mm-hmm.
He's an accelerant, and a pernicious accelerant, but the platform was in place to enable these affordances, whether it's anonymity, not being required to give any kind of validation of who you are, what you are, where you are. You could be you could be anyone from anywhere on Twitter,
Right.
and you could say you're in Saskatoon, or Regina, or anywhere across the prairies in
Mm.
Canada, and you could be in Beijing or Pakistan.
Right.
It's the way that it's architected.
Right. But I mean, it's so important that people understand the notion with QAnon. This was a story that there was a high level government official with a Q level clearance, which I don't believe Michael Flynn has. I recently did John Cypher's podcast, who was a CIA operative, who said I actually had a Q level clearance. It's about nuclear secrets. It's
Mm.
not just like what the story on with QAnon, but the idea is projecting meaning making. What did and dropping crumbs and bakers and let's figure out this thing, and it morphed from where Trump was saying don't pay attention to them to like yay QAnon and signaling,
Yep.
and now it's still going as far as I can tell.
Oh, it's going. I think one of the most important findings for me in the paper was that in that 2017 data set that I write about, which was I started collecting the day Flynn pled guilty, which was about 5 weeks into the start of the QAnon posts, the Q
Hmm.
posts, that became so central to the building of the narrative. And within the 2.3 million mentions of Flynn, I did find, not until a couple of years later, a very knowledgeable group of users who knew all the buzzwords of QAnon. And in 2017, nobody knew nobody knew about. There were no scholarly papers till really late 2019 and or mid 2019, 2020 is when it really started to come into the press. So in 2017, if you were writing knowledgeably about follow the white rabbit, these other QAnon buzzwords, and filling your tweets up with hashtags, it was all about Flynn.
Yeah.
There's a deep evidentiary basis for thinking a certain group of actors on Twitter knew way too much about this thing that wasn't going to be fully public for 2 more years.
Right.
And they were all kind of freaking out and calling Flynn a hero and saying this is proof of what is coming, the Great Awakening, these other kinds of buzzwords of the movement were all hashtagged into these tweets, but really you would have had to be in on it
To know
and
that. And I
fully
actually
read in.
counsel a woman who got recruited into QAnon by people in Falun Gong who worked at the Epoch Times. And when I met with her at her husband and her request, she said that she believed that Flynn was a good guy and that he, was going to be shown to be highly credible and at the root of QAnon. She promised her husband and me that if Trump wasn't reelected in 2020, she would leave. But then I later checked in and reneged on that promise. She stayed involved with the group for a while after that. But let's just say, didn't Flynn take out a copyright on the term digital soldier? Like, wasn't he
There's
involved with psyops for the U.S. government before he flipped and turned his
I
expertise
think he's
against
got
us?
he does have professional credentials within the U.S. government as somebody who would design and implement psychological operations, and
Mm-hmm.
it's as a layout in the paper. He lost his job about 5 weeks into the Trump presidency.
First one,
It
yeah.
the first one, uh, and then Roger Stone started tweeting about things that sounded very much like QAnon, but it was only August of 2017. There hadn't been any QAnon posts or anything on 4chan. It was all sort of a preview that Roger Stone said Flynn had information on the pedophiles, and this was, going to bring down the deep states. The whole foundational story of QAnon was being previewed before the first post by Roger Stone, and he was saying Flynn had the details. So for me, these are the bits of data that you look at. You say, well, then you go a little further back. Okay, first person to do a certain kind of military visit in Russia goes to the dinner with Putin and Jill Stein in 2015. There's a whole series timeline.
Michael Flynn was the person you were
There's a
saying back
timeline of
then.
things for General Flynn to make these connections and to have incentives. And his recent activity just sort of seemed like a money grubbing version of Christian white now. Like he's too hot to handle, which is hard to believe for this government that there's no Secretary of Defense or CIA director for Michael Flynn. He's clearly going to be stuck out there busking Christian nationalism and charging people, $59 for a Bible, probably.
Yeah, well, did you know that he was going around with the Moonies prior to the election with the freedom of Rod of Iron Freedom festivals, having people speak in tongues at these QAnon-esque rallies that he was recruiting, and the Moonies have training compounds teaching people how to shoot AR-15 rifles that they worship. And um, I think that he was surprised that Trump won so handily everything because they were readying people for civil war.
They were. And I think it may just speak again to the increasing importance of people like Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg and other people who've kissed the ring from the tech space and become digital enablers.
Right.
Uh, and Elon Musk just happens to be the the most powerful of them all.
Yeah. I do want to mention Roger Stone was a Nixon devotee, has a huge tattoo of Nixon, I believe, on his back. Long history with Russia. Roger Stone was pals with Lyndon LaRouche, conspiracy cult leader who ran for U.S. president 8 times unsuccessfully, was put in jail as a felon for stealing money from elderly people. But the links to Russia through Roger Stone, who also did the WikiLeaks, dump after the Access Hollywood tape was released, was bad actor. And of course, he was pardoned by Trump after
Yes.
in the first thing. So let's talk more about your thoughts about information warfare and recommendations that people who are listening. I know that you are an advocate because we were talking before we started recording about taking a break from social media to allow your brain to come back to more sane, normal, real life things. Talk to us about some of your recommendations for.
Well, obviously, everybody needs to do what's best for their mental health. And after about 5 years of immersion in the data and the research and briefing a variety of people who uh, didn't seem to understand or take seriously the nature of the threat vectors being described, I did remove myself from a lot of social media platforms and try to uh, focus on things like swimming, dog walking, and other things. And
Pizza
so
making. I know you
pizza
have a.
making, yeah, a lot of it's showing up over my shoulder. But yeah, growing my skills as a pizza chef has really been one of the ways that I have substituted cooking for posting,
Mm,
which it's not for everybody, and I do sometimes itch. But as I mentioned, it took me about almost 2 months to stop formulating social media posts in my head automatically, whether it is about pizza or dogs or gardens, and to think that there is a world. It's funny because this is really what a lot of academics are doing with Twitter. They're saying I need to separate myself from this toxic space. I don't want to be on it. I don't want to be near it. And yet that's sort of seeding the ground. And I think I may mention in the paper, I think that's probably something Elon Musk would like, is if everybody who was like you or me got off Twitter, it would be more of a safe space for, people who want to make Germany great again in the worst way.
yeah, Zig Heil and all of that. His
Right.
promotion of the ADF was horrifying, and
I mean,
and
you go down the list. I thought as somebody who is a political science PhD and thinks the separation of powers is a real thing, and that the courts I often disagree with, but I have to live with, and I do accept their rules and their rulings and their procedures. And I used to teach poli sci 101, so that's where you start. I mean,
right,
after you get through
civics.
the family, say it's where you have to have some checks, and why that was genius, and why a bunch of slaveholding and dead racists with shady backgrounds came up with a genius document despite themselves is separation of powers. And so it's been very difficult for me to watch Doge and Elon Musk standing there for 30 minutes with his child in
Was
in
very.
in in the Oval Office, and his black make America, like, thinks he's some sort of evil superhero. And what we're losing, on a really practical sense, are hard won victories for basic regulation of the marketplace. You know, drugs that don't kill you, food that doesn't kill you, a workplace that doesn't kill you, a work week that doesn't kill you, the right to holiday, the right to get medical treatment. All these things were incrementally won the right not to be discriminated against, everything that is good in U.S. history that was the product of the people struggling to make the country better has been all wiped away in less than a month.
Yeah, you left
And
out
we're talking.
global climate crisis and
I could go
abortion,
on
buddy.
all day.
Yeah.
Every single thing that is going on right now, even the news just today of these conservative Federalist Society senior people in the Justice Department quitting and writing these remarkable letters. I mean, a lot of people have been saying, how long can this go on? Today, mark my words, February 14th, this was a tipping point in American history today
Mm.
with what some of these resigning officials said in their letters. They're conservatives, they're Kavanaugh people, they're Justice Roberts's people. They're people who clerked for
And
the most.
Scalia, I believe, the
Yeah, they
prosecutor in New
clerked for
York
the
was a
most.
clerk for Scalia.
They're the most conservative leading lights of the legal world, and they're respected by liberals and conservatives alike. And they're all starting to quit in protest and say that none of this is legal. And I mean, thank goodness, because I've been worried that we weren't going to see any of this kind of. I think today will be a tipping point. I really
Well,
do.
I hope so. All I can say is that we have to think about our children and our grandchildren and the future of the planet. This notion that let the criminals run things, let's destroy the US dollar, let's dismantle the Fed, you know, let's bow to Putin and do whatever he wants so he can take over the rest of Europe is just like no, 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 no.
I think people are waking up that the egg prices are still going up, and that when you do run the government like a mafia type crime organization, I mean, some of the thing that just happened with the mayor of New York is why these people are quitting, which is you can't say we're going to pause the charges if you carry our political water for you on deporting, migrants out of New York City. This is why people are leaving the government today, is because this is just absolutely not how the rule of law works. You cannot make that kind of deal with the mayor of a city or anyone else for that matter. So we're
Right,
living through stuff every day is a massive civics lesson. I think the real challenge for people now is to consume enough of it that they can engage in some politics and some resistance. I think people are having a hard time just consuming it
right.
and
No,
then
that's a
figuring out,
mistake to overload.
well,
You don't need to listen for 10 hours to the same news. And so many things are happening. That's part of the Russian strategy is just overwhelm
right.
with so many newsworthy things that nobody can cope because the brain is limited. But I do think that this is my 2 cents, and I'm not hearing this enough in the public space. But I've been saying since the first Trump election, don't call your family members and friends and coworkers morons and idiots because they got lied to and their minds got hacked to believe Trump was a great businessman, etc. Because I know cult mentality. And if you attack with information the leader, the doctrine, or the group, it just makes the cult identity double down and makes you feel like you're the enemy for bringing up these facts. And right now, because the egg prices are going up, now we have bird flu
Yeah.
looming, right? Now's the time everyone should be reaching out to their family and friends, especially if they were Trump voters and Trump supporters, to just say, "I miss you. You're part of my family. Can we reboot our relationship? I really am very interested and curious to understand what you're thinking and feeling now, given what we're seeing." But be open and be an active listener because What works is asking questions in a respectful way that encourages the person to reflect and give a response. And then you can do a follow up question. But it has to be done out of respect and curiosity and love and not condemnation. And I told you he was a cult leader. I gave you the cult of Trump. I'm like, don't give MAGA people the cult of Trump. That's for you to read. At some point, you could say, I'd be curious to get your reaction to this part of the cult of Trump. Would you consider reading it and talking with me about it? That's, like a step in the right direction. But what I'm trying to say, and then I'll shut up because it's your interview, is that family and friends are going to be the most effective agents to empower people to start reality testing and thinking for themselves, and people coming to their own conclusions that they were hacked, that they were lied to, that they trusted untrustworthy people, that they don't want to live in a dictatorship under Putin control or Xi control, or Musk, tech bro, transhumanism, let's screw the earth and go to Mars and android bodies ideology. Anyway, I'm done with my rants, Stu. Back to you, buddy.
Well, and I agree. It sounds like what you're describing would also be good teaching in the classroom, which is, half of every classroom has got a Trump household member in it, and there has to be a way to lead them to questions. They like to question things, maybe different questions, different
Yeah,
frames,
I'm
but
planning.
not a judgment. I agree. You're right. The finger wagging toward the end of the presidential campaign, and the calling of the fascism, and the not going on Joe Rogan, and being too rigid. These were all symptoms of a national political party that's completely out of touch
Meaning the
with
Democrats were
the
completely
Democrats,
not
completely out of touch with how most Americans live and think. And I'm very sorry for it. Unfortunately, we're here,
right.
and there needs to be a fundamental rethinking of how to speak. My son mentioned, there are certain people, certain sports broadcasters. I won't say which one that might be good as leaders of the Democratic ticket. Rather than conventional politicians or senators or governors.
Hmm.
Somebody people watch 5 days a week and have as a part of their life who speaks the language of sports, but also politics. You know, that kind of thinking is not where we are right now, but that's certainly part of what is Trump's genius, if he has any, is he's in all those places where regular Americans get their regular information or entertainment, and we are not. We are not there.
Yeah, and I'm going to push back a little bit and just say, in my opinion, he's no genius. He's being instructed by geniuses in military and
That's fair.
mimetic
That's
warfare. But he's an uneducated person who likes to watch TV, and he
he.
knows NLP, and he knows how to talk hypnotically to elicit emotional states,
Mm,
and repeat it over and over and over again. And that's what we're learning from neuroscience, is that if you hear a lie over and over and over again, the brain starts acting as if it is a fact when it isn't.
for better or worse, that counts for genius in American politics these days. So
Yeah,
it may not be the conventional definition,
I'm
but
pushing back because
the
he's,
deployment of those subtle and overt means of influence, I think, it's fine to say it's not. I'm sure he's not smart enough to do it, but he's. If you watch either version of Manchurian Candidate, he is one, and that's not easy.
yeah.
to
No,
hold that up.
yeah, I do think that well, I interviewed Yuri Shvets with Craig Unger when the book American Compromat came out, and Yuri Shvets said I was much higher up in the KGB than Vladimir was, and we recruited Donald Trump decades ago, and gave details about the recruitment, not as an agent, as an asset,
You know, we're in a pretty bad place right now,
yeah.
uh, presidency wise, Congress wise. Let's see if the courts. The scariest thing I've heard is this idea that, okay, maybe the courts will push back, and how are they going to enforce it? And to me, when they start talking like that, we may be in a spot of bother.
Yeah, that's what I heard George Conway saying. George wrote a foreword for the re-release of The Cult of Trump, and I heard him recently say that the courts can, issue edicts, but it's up to the DOJ to enforce it and
Exactly.
send the marshals. But who's in charge of the DOJ, and who just got put in charge of our intelligence? A member of a cult group, Science of Identity, Tulsi Gabbard. So I'm like, ah. But I want to switch gears to
Sure.
your expertise and say, so if, a few billionaires came to you, Mark Cuban, Reid Hoffman, a few other, Bill Gates, let's say, and said, Stu, we need to create a social media platform that's trustworthy and fact checking and something that people can trust and rely on for information. What comes to mind for your suggestions of?
Substack. I mean, that's where my son gets a lot of his information, and it seems to have a lot of the now similar features of most of the platforms. I don't know who runs it or how it's.
I'm on Substack, but I gotta say, my colleague Dave Troy, who I respect a lot, said, Andreessen and Horowitz are major funders of Substack, and he's
Well,
recommending Substack
maybe
is not going to last as a great platform for critics.
all I know is right now it's when I just went on it to follow my son because he posts some interesting things there, and
I have to
then
follow
I
your son. You have to
put
send
it
me
on, yeah, Liam Carpenter's film, and then I put it on my phone. I looked at it. I said, "Wait, this looks just like Twitter," because it did.
Mm.
It's got different. There's sort of the blog element, but in terms of your bigger question, what's the hope? I mean, it's very hard to say. I thought the inauguration event with the tech oligarchy there was one of the most sobering things I've seen in my life. It's one thing to have all the senators in your party line up behind lawlessness and a felon for president, and a Supreme Court that says if the president does it, it's legal. But when these really powerful, really wealthy, really algorithmically fluent people stood up there, I found that was dreadful for me, and quite sobering. And of course, everything since then, all the kowtowing, and
Right.
just getting uh, getting on the Trump train. I mean, that's in the paper. It's the opening of the paper is how the Trump trains were one of the key mechanisms of the alternate reality game to bring it back to where we started. They
Mm.
would tag, 30, 40 like-minded people. They'd all get notifications. Everybody would retweet, reply, more notifications. It was a genius little thing, the Trump train. And then to see the heads of platforms, at that inaugural ceremony in the most coveted positions on the
Yeah.
stage, it was quite symbolic of the return of the Trump train, which means not only will those affordances be there, there's not going to be any regulation of hate speech. I can show you some
Right.
terrible data sets I've created I didn't create them. I gathered them
Mm-hmm.
because of the lack of of regulation and the end of trust and safety, which was never perfect and part of the problem at times. But now
Right.
there are still suspensions. This is one of the things that surprised me, was to see there are still some accounts being suspended, and I have to wonder what for, because sometimes they look like accounts that you kind of would have want to had suspended because
Major
they were.
news media maybe are being suspended.
No, like sometimes they look like right wing radicals or other people you would sort of want suspended because they're run amok
Mm.
with their alternate reality games. Anyway, so there is still some activity to
Yeah.
regulate behavior, but in answer to your question, I don't think any of us are smart enough to scheme out a platform that is bulletproof to human foibles. It's
Mm.
just the humans are too flawed. The platform's going to always amplify the flaws.
So I saw a quote from Mark Cuban, who said, if anyone can build a platform using the open source coding of Blue Sky and build in the algorithmic power of a TikTok, contact me because I'll fund it,
Hmm.
which I thought was interesting. But I do want to just mention Ian Bremmer did I believe, a TED talk that I looked at, and I think it's a year or two ago, where he was talking about people like Musk and Zuckerberg and other major tech bros, and saying that he thinks that the future isn't governments, it's these media moguls who have a billion people's attention, wanting to be above nation states and creating their own version of governance as CEOs. And it seems like with Musk, there's this movement, just hearing some leaks, especially from the Bannon MAGA out area, that Musk wants to take over and get rid of Trump and put Vance in place. Like that could be what's happening beyond the Trump
Well,
train.
as far as I can tell, Trump's played golf every other day. He's been president. He doesn't seem to be doing much other than using his Sharpie pen and holding things up.
Yeah,
And Elon Musk rightly was on the cover of Time behind the big desk. I think we're there, Steve.
yeah,
Unfortunately, we're not inching towards some weird tech proligarch dream. We're in it. We're
yeah,
living it. It's happening right now. It's bizarre. I mean, like I said, I think today is the dam breaking. Hopefully, in terms of the legal structure, one of the things that I think Trump is finding out is, especially with his deportation, if your government agencies are not 100% behind you, this is going to be harder than you think
right,
to do what you said you're going to do.
right,
And if you put everybody in fear, they might submit and comply. Or if you fire enough people, everybody's going to fear they're about to be fired. They're not going to carry out, everything's going to break down. So I don't know where we are with unemployment numbers, but I think 200,000 people got pink slips today in the government. I know a lot of government contractors are shut down. I used to be a government contractor. I'm out of that business now.
mm-hmm,
I got
mm-hmm,
out just in time, actually, because probably the agency that I primarily serve, the Fish and Wildlife Service, will not be protecting endangered species
right,
by the end of 2025 because the laws that Congress has passed and presidents have signed, including Trump, are not going to be enforced because the rule of law is breaking down.
right,
And I think it's something, as a professor of political science and a historian, I can't compare it to anything. There's no
yeah.
comparison to anything in the history of this country.
Yeah, well, the social media is the big game changer from the Hitler takeover, where it took them 53 days to consolidate the Nazi power over Germany, which maxed at 10% of the German people, by the way. He didn't He didn't brainwash, convert everybody, but he had enough power and used terrorism and fear, using the Gestapo and everything else. And now we have like digital surveillance everywhere, and all of our personal data presumably has been taken now by Musk, in addition to what the Chinese have already hacked from
Yeah,
us. Um, so I don't know. I'm a mental health professional. I have these HIPAA rules where I have to protect all of my clients' data, and all of our data is now owned in the dark web by bad actors.
I believe that is a fair thing. And when a judge tells Elon's proteges that they have to give back or delete all the data they sucked out of the Treasury Department on their raid, they have absolutely no way of confirming the deletion,
Right,
of confirming there's no backup of the data. It's out.
right.
It's all out.
Yeah,
And we're in a very, very strange place. I think it has to affect people across the professional spectrum politically, like Republicans, conservatives, independents. They all have a stake in the rule of law, in institutions. They might not be on food stamps, but they have family members. They
of
require a
course.
functioning, stable political economy. And
Yeah,
I can't imagine this one is going to be functional or stable
right,
in 12 months. In the
right.
way we're going, unless there's a dramatic change, so many people will be out of work. The unemployment rate's going to go way up. The price is going to go way up. The tariffs are going to go way up. Trade wars are going to go up. It
That's
looks
why I
like a
feel like
long
the talking to people who voted for the GOP and getting them to have protests in the streets is maybe going to have an impact. That and Wall Street, people losing their retirement funds. I know farmers are upset with loss
yes,
of USAID funds because they would grow
absolutely.
food to distribute to poor people around the world. They're not happy.
The reason we have such a powerful agricultural sector is because the government got involved in not only agricultural science and all of the things that USDA does to promote more productive and sustainable farming, but my dissertation was about the Federal Farm Loan Act of 1916, which was when the government got in to lending money to farmers, and
Hmm.
Woodrow Wilson signed it into law as part of a whole series of laws that were passed during his presidency. It quite dramatically changed the political economy of the United States. I mean, we got the Federal Reserve, we got a whole bunch of interventions in the market economy. And the Federal Farm Loan Act was one of those interventions to create the farm loan banks. Anybody who has a mortgage, a 30-year amortized mortgage on a house, can thank the Federal Farm Loan Act of 1916, because before that, there was no amortization in the United States. And every loan for every piece of property was a 3 to 5 year max, if not year to year. And you had to renegotiate all the time, and you were always over the barrel for rates. And so
I
when
didn't
the
know that.
government jumps in and stabilizes the farm loan market in 1916, it promotes agriculture, prosperity, rural happiness, health, well being, but also ultimately the American housing industry.
Yeah, and middle class.
Middle class, path to middle class, 30-year fixed rate mortgage was because the government basically looked at Europe and came up with a public policy that where the government got involved in lending money to farmers.
Yep, yep. It's fascinating. So, when you think of young aspiring researchers, any words of wisdom? People who are young activists who want to do something constructive to give us hope?
Well, I heard somebody say the other day, it's important not to do everything online.
Mm-hmm.
It's important to remember the value of um, going to a street protest, working in some sort of mutual aid or support group where you actually have to get out of your house. And so I'd say, what even as a digital authoritarian scholar, if that's what I am,
Yeah, you
I
are.
would say that's probably the most important thing
In real life, have
is to have real
relationships.
life stuff. And that was actually um, something that I think I was losing in my own
Hmm.
practice because I had become such an online person. And
Mm-hmm.
in terms of what young people, I mean, my son just got accepted to a bunch of law schools. And he said to me out of the blue, but maybe I'll just, go to rural British Columbia and become a farmer. And this is a very smart young man who got into very good, prestigious law school saying he wants to become a farmer because he's not sure about the future of the rule of law. So,
Interesting.
and he's never gardened a day in his life. So the paradox for me is great. I'm going to have some help in the garden, but this was a future great lawyer, who could do good things for the world. And
Right?
that's so to tell my son or any other young person what to do in light of the current events, I would say pay attention, don't tune it out, diversify your sources, get more BBC, CBC,
Mm-hmm.
just news sources from outside the
The
country,
Guardian,
from some,
I
yeah,
read.
yeah. There's all sorts of good. The Atlantic is great.
Yep.
Anne Applebaum,
Yep.
every single word she puts to paper or online is worth reading.
I
So
like Richardson too. She has a great Substack with millions of readers.
exactly. So that's what I would tell them is don't turn away or go into a cocoon or you're going to come out. It's going to be even worse. That we do need to remain engaged, vigilant, political. We need to I mean, none of those things that I was bemoaning the loss of, all those small victories for public policies, health, welfare, labor, safety, occupational health and safety. Do we really want to get rid of OSHA? It's a really bad idea
Yep.
to, to get rid of OSHA because they do, they stop people from being dismembered in the workplace or crippled in the workplace. But maybe that's somebody's idea of freedom. Every time we've tried it, it hasn't worked. People in the end don't like it, and hopefully there'll be a recursive moment in 2026 where some major blowback happens despite gerrymandered districts in the
Yeah.
U.S.
And, there every Musk and Zuckerberg have relatives who could be talking to them going, you have a lot of money. Is this really how you want to leave a legacy to do these kinds of things that are harming people, where people are going to have such bad feelings towards you? That
I
might
think
be helpful.
Mr. Zuckerberg had long ago learned how to not care what other people thought about him.
Hmm.
That goes right back to the founding of Facebook in the Harvard dorm room.
Hmm.
He was always a little bit indifferent to the negative blowback of his actions, and it's just become a spiral. I
Hmm.
think.
So I get, was there anything else that I want to ask you? We've covered a lot of ground. But you're gonna hopefully do a master's or teach or
I'm taking a trip up to British Columbia
mm,
to visit friends and family. I grew up there, and I'm going to teach a workshop on March 7th, um, hosted by a couple of units at the university.
mm-hmm,
And I am an applicant to go back and get a master's of library and information science
mm,
because, as I keep telling people, my PhD is 25 years old, and it had more to do with the progressive era farm press and
uh,
loans to farmers than with stopping tech bros from destroying something I truly love, which is the painful, excruciating process of democratic reform.
right. And talk just as we're wrapping up about the importance of libraries and efforts of the library associations.
I love libraries and librarians. I've always found them to be the most incredibly resourceful and interesting people. A lot of my dissertation work was archival, so I had to work directly with either archivists or interlibrary loan people. I think the role for librarians now is around responsible use of digital technologies. So helping people of all ages become digital citizens in the right way, which means with an open but skeptical mind and an ability to discern reliable and trustworthy from partisan and dangerous sources of information. I hope to be able to translate my work on the digital citizenship from almost 25 years ago at Drake University in Des Moines, Iowa, where it was a service learning project, into a practice
Mm-hmm.
and a mode of education where all librarians will, and they already do really, contribute to um, responsible use of digital resources.
Right. It's great. Dr. Stu Schulman, thank you for being you, being an upstanding person. And yes, we're living at a existential moment in human history. And there are a lot more of us than there are of the bad guys, in my opinion. I mean, I think people in Russia can't stand Putin. They know that he murdered Navalny. People who have grown up in China, who've come to Western universities, they've tasted what it's like to be more free and don't want to live where everybody's reporting you if you jaywalk, and you're going to lose social credit and risk being put into brainwashing programs as the Chinese government continues to operate. So my work, is not going to slow down. It's speeding up because I feel everyone needs to understand my influence continuum and my bite model of authoritarian control and how to reality test and um and if something is legitimate, it'll stand up to scrutiny, and don't automatically diss any information that's critical of your belief, and be prepared to change your belief if there's facts that support a change of point of view. And my 2 cents as we're wrapping up to young people is, because when we were younger, Stu, we thought about a career, like there was like a trajectory that we could count on. Things are changing so fast with AI too, which is, hard to fathom how fast things are changing. But I tell young people, focus on skill sets, like learning how to listen, learning how to public speak, learning how, like practical skill sets, and be prepared to pivot. Like you can go here, you can go there, but you're centered, you trust yourself, you can rise to learn whatever you need to learn and adapt to whatever you need to adapt to. And lastly, I'll say I reread Viktor Frankl's book Man's Search for Meaning, which was written right after he exited 4 concentration camps, and he said that the never give up hope. Like you need to have a future you want to live for, and that's what kept people going despite the most horrendous attacks on their, on their body, on their heart, and on their psychology. And he lived to be 92. He got 29 honorary doctorates and talked about how we're meaning making creatures, and we need to have that hope that we're going to contribute to a positive future. We're going to have a meaningful life. So those are my last words. Any last words from you?
No, I like that. I'm working on that myself.
Great.
I'm hoping to get a chance to do it through teaching and writing
Uh,
and being present with the people who I trust
yeah.
most.
Yeah. Trust is really important. Thank you for being you. Please stay in touch.
I will, of course. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you. Steve Hassan here. It's been decades since my family rescued me from the Moonies. I've been at this for over 47 years. The need has never been greater. If you're able, please consider hitting the super thanks button below, and it'll help us to do better. Every penny will help us toward our goal of educating the planet about undue influence. Remember, it's your mind, only you should control it.